Bertha von Suttner is well known because of her book, Lay Down Your Arms, and because she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Peace Prize certainly helped her in her continuous campaign against international disarmament, or against international armament. The question we ask us today: do international prizes generally help activists, individualists, NGOs, organizations in their efforts to gain a peaceful world? This is the question we will highlight and discuss now in the afternoon, and highlight the various aspects of international peace prizes. My name is Christine Muttunen, and I'm going to guide you through this session. I'm very glad that we have three profound experts here with us. Each of them has a very impressive curriculum vitae. So when I introduce them, allow me, I will only say some details. It never can be the whole. Mr. Gunnar Stålsett, he is the Bishop Emeritus of Oslo and Honorary Co-President of Religions for Peace. He has previously served, among other positions, as Vice Chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. Prior to his church career, he also served as a parliamentarian and in government, including as the Norwegian government's special envoy to East Timor. He held positions with UNAIDS, UNESCO, and the World Economic Forum. For his engagement for peace and human rights, he has received several honorary doctoral degrees and a number of awards. Thank you very much for being here with us. Mr. Fredrik Heffermehl is a Norwegian jurist, writer, and peace activist. He has worked as a lawyer and civil servant, as well as leader of peace organizations. Mr. Heffermehl was the first Secretary General of the Norwegian Humanist Association. He is the Honorary President of the Norwegian Peace Council, a former Vice President of the International Peace Bureau, and a former Vice President of the International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms. And he is also co-founder of the Lay Down Your Arms Foundation. He is also the co-founder of the Nobel Peace Prize Watch, which highlights Nobel Peace Prize nominations. Thank you for being here. And Mr. Alyn Ware, you probably know him, most of you. He is a peace educator and a nuclear disarmament consultant from New Zealand, and now he is living in Prague. He is the global coordinator of parliamentarians for non-nuclear proliferation and disarmament, and the director of the Basel Peace Office and a consultant for the International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms. He has co-founded a number of initiatives in the last days, weeks, especially working for Move the Nuclear Weapons Money, and he also co-founded Unfold Zero. He is a recipient of a number of awards, including the UN International Year of Peace Award and the Livelihood Award, which you probably all know better under the expression Alternative Nobel Peace Prize. So we have a lot of competence here about peace prizes, and I would like to start with you, Mr. Stålsett. The Nobel Prize is one of the most prestigious, if not the most prestigious peace prize. in a series of other awards. Still, there is always a discussion about it when it comes to the nominations, but maybe this is also something that, again, helps the Nobel Peace Prize. So, do you think that peace prizes and peace awards can still or can support civil society and their engagement, and how can they support it? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here. It's only 1.5 hours flight from Oslo, so I had breakfast in Oslo with my wife and then a nice flight here, and it's good to be here with you. And thank you for inviting me to... Is it on? There it is. Thank you for inviting me to address this critical topic. I was told that I have about 20 minutes, so fasten your seatbelts and relax. I have chosen to focus on one prize, although I have served on the committee of 2 such awards for many years, the Nobel Peace Prize and the Nivano Peace Prize. The Nivano Peace Prize is a Buddhist-founded prize in Japan, but I will concentrate on the Nobel Peace Prize because that relates more directly to the key person for our conference. Today, I feel that we celebrate a vision that never dies. We feel sorrow of war, and we sense a longing for peace. We sense the heartbeat of heroes, but also the will of everyday women and men who brought light in times of darkness. The Countess Bertha von Suttner is a lady with a lamp of peace. She is today also shining on our path towards truth, justice and reconciliation. And she challenges us to seek what serves for peace today. Here in Prague, we praise the profound humanism and religious roots of the new Czech Republic. We honor centuries of this nation's secular and spiritual contribution to European culture. This beautiful city and its people have lived through a history of oppression and may now rejoice in freedom. Born in this city, Countess Bertha von Suttner was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. By her anti-war novel, Lay Down Your Arms, she reached a vast audience in Europe and in the USA. Her non-violence strategies and her vision for a world without arms inspired the peace movement of her time and have a message even today. Her acceptance speech in Oslo in 1905 was titled The Evolution of the Peace Movement. If evolution has a leader, she was one. If development needs inspiration, she gave it. When we today seek direction, she is a mentor. Her message rings equally relevant today as more than 100 years ago. She calls us, individuals and civil society, academics and politicians, to courageous actions for peacemaking. She personified freedom, and she embodied civil courage. Bertha von Suttner had inspired Alfred Nobel to include peace in his last will. It was her understanding that is reflected in the words of the Testament: fraternity between nations, abolition of standing armies, the holding and promotion of peace congresses. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee, consisting of 5 members appointed by the Norwegian Parliament, as it is stipulated in Nobel's testament, are stewards of the will of Alfred Nobel. They are tasked with the problematic and challenging contextualization of a somewhat open peace concept. Among hundreds of candidates, it's about 300 every year now, they must find the recipient who stands out, be it an individual, an institution, or a movement. Along with the evolution of the peace movement, there has been an evolution of the understanding of peace, and hence development of the prize. So what was the intention of Alfred Nobel? How was peace understood then? What is peace today? No wonder, therefore, that this most coveted prize is also the most controversial. Again this week, on Friday at 11 o'clock, we may expect praise and protest as the 29th laureate is announced to the world. It was my privilege to serve on the committee for 17 years, off and on, since 1985, and I underscore off and on because when I meet people who are critical of one prize, I say, maybe I was not in the committee that year. I started in 1985, and I know the arduous process and the excitement of a consensus after months of deliberation. Let me, for our sort of mutual understanding, give a short encounter with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and laureates to inform our topic. Since 1901, there are 133 laureates, 106 individuals, and 27 organizations. The prizes in this period span a wide range of activities for peace. Obvious by the candidates, of course, are representatives of disarmament, arms control, and peace negotiations. But humanitarian work and human rights have been included from the beginning. Democracy and development signify the evolution towards a broader concept of positive peace. Most of the prizes involve an element of civil society, hence the relevance of the title today. Be it the Red Cross, which has received the honor 3 times, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees 2 times, and not least the anti-apartheid struggle, the nuclear issue, or the climate crisis. Civil society is at the heart of the action of all of these. Apartheid was ousted only by the mobilization of civil society. The UN-led eliminations of weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons, can only be implemented by grassroots engagement. The critical efforts today to save Mother Earth, likewise. I see the Sustainable Development Goals as an agenda for peace. They were identified in a consultative process with civil society. 5 million people from across the world share their vision for the world in 2030. And the 17 goals, such as education, better healthcare, access to clean water and sanitation, protecting rivers and forests and oceans, political freedoms, equality between men and women, these are, in my book, all dimensions of peace as a quality of life. This can only be reached in cooperation between individuals, civil society, and state. And I will return to this perspective. After this lengthy foreword, let Bertha von Suttner's own words give us a glimpse of her talent. She opened her Nobel lecture in Oslo with these words, I quote, "The stars of eternal truth and right have always shone in the firmament of human understanding. The process of bringing them down to earth, remolding them into practical forms, imbuing them with vitality, and then make use of them, has been a long one." Has been a long one. Indeed, the process for peace in Europe had already been century-long when she spoke, but worse were to come. 2 world wars were yet to brutalize Europe. Evil was to dehumanize politicians on a scale never seen before. Instead of the downing of arms, development of weapons of mass destruction. Instead of a Europe of harmony and solidarity, Holocaust, deportations, mass migration, death by famine and disease, Europe, once priding itself as a civilized, humane, and Christian continent, entered an age of war crimes and crime against humanity. To use a term of Bertha von Suttner, the firmament of human understanding, this is her term, the firmament of human understanding was blackened by the clouds of bombs, stained by innocent blood, and buried in mass graves. And yet, there was that still prophetic voice of peace through all these years. There was that unquenchable hope for freedom. Bertha von Suttner's values of eternal truth and right survived. A new world order emerged. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights inaugurated a new chapter in human history. And this, in my understanding, reflects the spirit and the vision of Bertha von Suttner. Again, I quote her, "One of the eternal truths is that happiness is created and developed in peace. And one of the eternal rights is the individual right to life. The strongest of all instincts, that of self-preservation, is an assertion of the right affirmed and sanctified by the ancient commandment, 'Thou shalt not kill.'" End quote. Today, in a new century, there are dramatic setbacks in Europe. There is a denial of the legitimacy of everyone's quest for happiness. There is a rejection of every individual's right to life. This regression is threatening European identity, destroying its unity, and undermining fundamental values. Thus, Bertha von Suttner's words should sound as a wake-up call to Europe, its leaders, its politicians, and ordinary people today. To be precise, she tells us that self-preservation for migrants and refugees is both a shared human instinct and a divine command. "Thou shalt not kill." In the Jewish philosopher Levinas's interpretation, it is best expressed, he says, this commandment, when you hear it, "Thou shalt not kill me." But again, progress has been made. We rejoice that the individual's right to life is enshrined in international law. The right to peace is repeatedly affirmed and further developed by solemn declarations. Yes, right to peace are asserted but not yet as a human right to peace. The UN has still to move to that chapter. In this city of Prague, the birthplace of Bertha Suttner, the nexus of war and peace marked the century after her death. It was here that Václav Havel continued her mission in Charter 17 and the European Council of Tolerance and Reconciliation, just to signal a few things. Bertha Suttner and Václav Havel shared a commitment to Europe as a beacon of civilization. In the annals, in the records of the Nobel Peace Prize, Bertha Suttner is followed by such prophetic peace messengers as Karl Friedrich von Ossietzky, who in the 1930s fought Nazism and fascism and was sentenced to prison for treason and espionage. In this century, there is Liu Xiaobo, who in 2011, the Chinese who in 2011 was honored for his long, non-violent struggle for fundamental human rights. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison for inciting subversion of the state. Among others in her category on the list of peace heroes are, as you remember, Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, Dalai Lama, Rigoberta Menchú, Lech Walesa, Elie Wiesel, and Nelson Mandela. They were, in a way, stars, personal stars, but their interaction with civil society was essential for their mission. And civil courage, again, was their hallmark. So let us for a moment focus on the concept of civil society. In modern discourse, the term is used interchangeably with non-governmental. That describes what it is not. We need to appreciate what it is. Civil society is an aspect of antiquity from Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. It is often referred to as the third sector of society, that is, between the individual and the state. In a few days, we shall honor the role of civil society when we commemorate the fall of the Berlin Wall, which both physically and ideologically divided Europe during the Cold War. Individual leaders and popular movements, such as the labor unions and religious institutions, constituted an alternative society to the oppressive communist state, and they prevailed. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who turned 90 this year, has restored civil society as a civilizational concept, an integral dimension of democracy. He uses the term public sphere to encourage a rational will formation. He maintains that the public sphere is a domain of rational and democratic interaction, community exchange, and social behavior. The public sphere is integral to the political realm. Remarkably, Jürgen Habermas acknowledges the essential and unique role that religious actors and voices may contribute in the public sphere. Civil society as a concept implies values, a commitment to human values. Civil society speaks truth to power, appealing to conscience and common sense. It stands in contrast to populism, to the sort of populism which we see today, marked by nationalism, race, ethnicity, and religious fundamentalism. Some governments tend to ignore civil society, or they look upon them with suspicion. Others turn to civil society actors only when these are supporting the political line of government. The dependence of civil society organizations on financial support from governments marks them vulnerable to such pressure. And pressure there is. Pressure against human rights, pressure against civil society. More dramatic is the language used by President Trump at the UN General Assembly opening session last month, when he described civil society support to refugees as evil. The same is reflected in the Brazilian President Bolsonaro's claim that the wildfires in Amazonas is a strategy of civil society. In Norway, in my country, representatives of a political party in government accuses the humanitarian organization Doctors Without Borders, who received the Nobel Peace Prize years ago, who attacked them because they support he attacked them as supporting human trafficking when they save refugees from drowning in the Mediterranean Ocean. Today, increasing billions of dollars that could and should have been invested in human development and climate protection are wasted in arms race under the pretext of national security. If national security were to be based on ethical principles and common sense, it would be limited to that which is necessary for the safety of all, not serving the dominance of the few. Indeed, there is no security if there is not security for all. Another issue for urgent and increased civil society action today is the atomic Armageddon. No other issue has found such frequent support by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee as has the nuclear threat. My first prize in 1985 was to the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. When the United Nations have taken an important step, towards a total outlawing and elimination of nuclear weapons, too many member states remain hostage to their own security arrangements. The UN Security Council, by its dominance of atomic powers and veto mechanism, acts as an obstacle to human security as long as it maintains its position for the nuclear weapons. 2 years ago, the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the work, I quote, to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. This par excellence civil society prize, with the impact on governments and international law, the many millions of campaigners and the multitude of organizations constituting ICAN, is the best expression in my book of how confluence of civil society, science, diplomacy and politics can establish a new global norm and in the end rid the world of one of the most obvious threat of mass destruction alongside the climate crisis. My organization, Religion for Peace, which brings together all major religions of the world, we held an assembly in Leinau, Germany, at the end of August, with 900 religious leaders from around the world, unanimously committed to the program of ICAN against nuclear weapons. The same category of threat to humanity is the climate issue. It has a stronger appeal for civil society today, especially among the younger generation. The campaign against climate change is, like the anti-nuclear weapons campaign, scientifically based, politically grounded, and universally recognized as a struggle to save humanity, to save our ecosystem and the entire biosphere. In conclusion, what drives civil society and what keeps it going on a mission for peace? The common thread in the efforts for peace by individuals and institutions, the common thread seen by International Peace Prize, is a commitment to shared, human values, protection of human dignity, and preservation of the earth. The battle for a democratic, tolerant, and value-based Europe is indeed fought in a battle for peace, for truth, freedom, and tolerance. Without respect of these values, that is, if we are forgetting or even rejecting the ethical heritage of our Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and humanist roots, we are left in a spiritual void and a moral chaos. Again, what is our shared identity, if not ethical values that have formed our civilization, which made it possible to counter the demons of Nazism, fascism, and Stalinism? Who are we if we do not follow the ethical imperative so often quoted by Bertha von Suttner, "Thou shalt not kill"? What is our strength if not our personal dignity and our spiritual heritage? So let me conclude my reflection on the positive note of Bertha von Suttner in words from her acceptance speech in Oslo again. Then she quoted her friend President Theodore Roosevelt, who a year earlier had received her in the White House. These are his words, and these are her words to us. I quote, "World peace is coming. It certainly is coming, but only step by step." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, a lot of food for thought. Step by step is something that we have to acknowledge, although we really want and maybe need a fast train. But this is what we have to deal with, that we really try and continue step by step. Mr. Heffermehl, how do you see those prizes, the awards, civil society? How can they support each other? Can prizes support civil society, or does civil society need those prizes to be better visible, maybe with their efforts, with their steps they make? Please.
Thank you. Thank you. My conclusion after long work on the Nobel Peace Prize is that the group in the world today that comes closest to the purpose that Nobel had in mind is actually civil society. Those who are working at international conferences and in many ways across borders and boundaries with the best of the world as a whole in mind. They have a very big advantage over the diplomatic community that is representing and struggling for their own narrow positions. So the Nobel idea of creating a brotherhood of nations, as the testament reads, is really materialized in today's world just by civil society organizations. I have prepared a speech, me too, and it is first important for me to say how emotional it is for me to be here. Prague occupies a very special place in my heart since I came here first time 50 years ago. I'm spellbound by the beauty and unique character of the Czech capital and the country's political history. I was often staying in a private home during the communist period and experienced how people coped with many hardships. Later, as a peace activist, I attended many international conferences here. In parallel, they were half official or of the period, but they were. We had contact with Charter 77 in parallel with the. So I got this special relation to this country at Princeton University in the U.S. in 1968 when I studied law there, and met one of the first Czech lawyers or students in general to go abroad to study when this possibility was opened during the Prague Spring. My friend is a very gifted lawyer, and during the whole summer of '68 he said again and again that there was no chance that the Russians would not respect Dubček and the new liberal political leadership. We are an independent country. A military intervention would be against the law. As we know, on August 21, Warsaw Pact forces crushed the reforms. I'm not off my topic. In fact, I just got to it. We should have listened to Bertha von Suttner, developed more adequate, respectful, sophisticated, non-violent relations between nations. Civilized interaction instead of military action. If the countries of the world had heeded the call to abolish arms, the Czech people would not have had to wait another 20 years for freedom and self-government. As long as there are military forces, they will tend to grow and expand and constitute a constant risk to be used for brutal and primitive interaction. And they also represent a constant political suppression of all alternative thinking, like the ideas of Bertha von Suttner. Militarism is like the disease of cancer. With her battle cry, "Lay down your arms," Bertha von Suttner made history's probably greatest attempt to cure the world. She ignited and stimulated the demand for a cooperation to liberate all nations from the costs and risks of military force and forces. And she got broad support. She met the leaders of the national leaders of the period. People at the time saw that there were two alternatives, two completely different ways to address security. The prospect of abolishing military force and forces were near a critical, pivotal point. The peace movement ideas acquired this status of an alternative, and the movement has never been stronger. The title for this Suttner celebration sounds like a fanfare. Ideas that never grow old. But is it right? Where are these ideas now? If you look around, the world is more weaponized than ever, and public debates seem to have neither room nor even an interest in the Suttner approach to peace. Modern weapons are horrific, can result in omnicide, the killing of everyone. I agree that Suttner's ideas, just for this reason, are younger than ever. But most of us have forgotten, and those who have not are unable to use the idea. And nowhere is this more clearly visible than in the management of the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, my interest in Suttner did not start with Suttner. I came to it via studies of Alfred Nobel and the Peace Prize. In these days, when Greta Thunberg is considered a favorite for the Nobel 2019, it's interesting to note that my interest 12 years ago was ignited by the fact that Al Gore was the main person in advanced speculations. I had a strong suspicion this must be far from what Nobel had in mind, and just a brief and superficial reading of Nobel's testament confirmed this. I wrote an article in the leading Norwegian newspaper where I asked the Norwegian committee to check their mandate, to immediately rethink its task and responsibility as managers of the Nobel Peace Prize. In this first expression of criticism, I further pointed out in clear, unambiguous terms that Nobel had established, and I quote, a peace prize, not a prize for the environment, not for economics, and also not for humanitarian work. If the 5 members appointed by the Parliament lose sight of this, it will undermine the character and status of the prize. Even if there are many views of what peace is, the committee is in no way free to choose laureates according to its own free judgment. Nobel endeavored a radical system change in international politics. He wished to discover the path that could lead to a world without war and abuse of power. I did not know at the time that in its first input that I was actually just asking of the Nobel Committee to respect and promote the ideas of Bertha von Suttner. Nobel intended the prize to support Suttner's political ideas and political friends. This was a legally binding instruction from Nobel that the awards should have been kept within. And this was not asking much. I only actually asked them to do what they should have done 106 years earlier. But this was never done, and they have proceeded to develop the concept of peace. And that peace can be everything. So that meant that the Norwegian committee took the right, they didn't have the right, but they took the right to shape and form the prize in whatever way they liked. It's of course impossible to implement Nobel's will without a precise check of all relevant evidence as to what he actually wanted. But there was no sign of interest in knowing what Nobel had wished, rather the opposite, and therefore I started to do the first legal interpretation ever of the will, and I published the result in a book in 2008. It has later been translated into 5 languages. In this process, I discovered Suttner, and that she indeed had understood that ideas need to be cultivated, not to grow old. She secured political and financial help with Alfred Nobel and his Peace Prize as a main success. The Nobel Prize may be seen as a coin with 2 sides, Nobel on the face and Suttner on the reverse. First, let me underline that the interpretation of wills is very often misunderstood as seeking to find out what the words mean to us, while the relevant goal is to find out what the testator meant by them. What images did Nobel have in mind as he signed his will on November 27, 1895? Certainly, the image of Suttner was very strongly on his mind. The truth is concrete, and it may be worth showing how closely the Prize of Nobel was connected to the novel of Suttner, Die Waffen nieder. I wish to read to you some of my chapter on Bertha von Suttner in the book I wrote on the Peace Prize. You will see exactly how I explained the close connection between the prize and Die Waffen nieder to the Nobel Committee 10 years ago, and then you may draw your own conclusions as to the results or the effect of my analysis. I wrote, "We have every reason to take a closer look at Suttner and whether the prize resulted from her entreaties for financial support. Her hope clearly was that Nobel would leave a substantial amount for her work. An earlier will in 1893 included a legacy of 1% of the total estate to Suttner's Austrian Peace Society, which in the final 1895 will became instead a prize for the abolition or reduction of armies." This is a specific wording of the will. In 1876, Bertha von Suttner, her last name was still Kinski, had worked for Nobel in Paris. And out of this, a very short stay together, and she returned to marry Arthur von Suttner, and they had established a contact that would last for the 20 years that still remained before Nobel died. Nobel having sowed the seed, Suttner gradually developed an interest in the cause. During the 1880s, it grew to an intense, burning devotion, and she became the era's leading champion of peace. Now it was she who put pressure on Nobel to do more for the cause. To someone wishing to map Nobel's thoughts, views, conceptions and feelings, which are the key factors in determining the content of a will, nothing is more enlightening than his friendship and correspondence with Suttner. Her book, Die Waffen nieder, a scathing criticism of the military, became one of the greatest international bestsellers. And Nobel expressed in April 1890, in an enthusiastic letter, he thanked Suttner for the book. There are 2,000 languages in the world, but surely your remarkable work must be translated into all of them. Not only do the criteria in the Testament make up the nucleus of the 1890s peace movement program, Suttner had discussed them with Nobel in a number of letters. He created the prize in response to Suttner's intense appeals, and Nobel immediately informed her when he had written his will in 1893. Suttner responded with enthusiasm. Well, this is not correct, she was very much against a prize. She wanted the peace movement to get money. And she did not know that the result before the testament was opened. But she had, in a letter, she said, "Whether or not I am still alive by then does not matter. What you and I, Mr. Nobel, have given will live on." And then I conclude, and this is essential. This exchange is of momentous importance to determine the character of the Peace Prize. One could just as well say that this is the lay down your arms prize. That's a good expression for the situation we have here today. I defined this in 2010 as the lay down your arms prize. And continue. its most distinctive content, the part that had made Nobel hesitate for so long before taking the step, can be summed up in one word: disarmament. The preconditions for this to happen, a new level of international law and order, cooperation and trust, are formulated through the two other expressions he used in the will: confraternization and peace congresses. The Nobel Peace Prize was perhaps the most lasting practical result of Suttner's skill as an organizer. With annual financial support secured in perpetuity, the ideas ought never to die. So one would have believed. And with this understanding that it was the Lay Down Your Arms Prize, I thought I had discovered gold. I had at the time worked in the peace movement for around 25 years. Our ideas were constantly overlooked and not listened to. Power and money counts. The military have lots of both, and no need to respond to criticism and protests from the peace movement. In this case, with the Nobel Peace Prize, it was different. The peace ideas had a legal right to funding and fame. The awarders on the Nobel Committee had a legal obligation and could be taken to court if they broke the law. A right to be heard and to be listened to. I thought that was something which the peace movement really needed. Nobel had entrusted the selection of prize winners to a committee selected by Norway's parliament. A fatal mistake. Norwegian politicians have always been unwilling to promote Suttner's anti-militarist idea. The lawmakers in the parliament have been surprisingly indifferent to the law. However nice many of the recipients have been, they have had little to do with the promotion of the ideas of Suttner and the Lay Down Your Arms novel. This continued also after the committee received my book, the first legal interpretation ever. Al Gore won in 2007, Matti Ahtisaari in 2008, Barack Obama 2009, the Chinese dissident Liu Xiaobo in 2010. None of them were qualified. To cut it short, the Nobel awarders have ignored my information, at least until the two last prizes, the one for ICANN, the nuclear ban in 2017, and for the Congolese doctor Denis Mukwege in 2018. The latter, however, did not get a Nobel Prize. It was presented as a humanitarian prize, aiming to reduce the suffering of women in war, not to end war. Among the conclusions I drew in that book in 2008 is that the development, the decay of the Nobel Peace Prize is just another example of a general rule. The military has such political power that all serious attempts at challenging it and charting a different course for mankind are bound to fail over time. What happened to the Nobel Peace Prize also happened to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, to anti-militarist political parties, to peace research, etc., etc. And let me quote once again from my book. I remember a friendship in the 1980s with Jiří Dienstbier and other Czechs in Charter 77. As the first post-communist foreign minister, Dienstbier voiced big plans for reducing arms production. And we know how those plans ended. The same goes for Nelson Mandela. in the early days after he came to power in South Africa, I read a news story in which he declared that the country's military production must be cut and the social needs of his people met. But other interests soon proved too strong for even so forceful a politician as Mandela. Perhaps someone in the audience can enlighten us on President Václav Havel and his early plans to build an economy without production for death and destruction. I believe he, like Nelson Mandela, experienced irresistible pressure from a well-organized military business. In my newest book, now ready for publishers in Czech and any other language, I explore further what the fate of the Nobel Peace Prize shows us about a huge black hole in our democracies and a deficiency in the political processes worldwide. Its title will be, "Shall We Never Get Rid of War?" In practical terms, Suttner's ideas may seem old and forgotten. Even those who remember see them as unrealistic, without value today. Our culture and our minds are so dominated by the militarist worldview that we, the non-believers, hesitate to mention the idea of liberating all nations from weapons, warriors and war. We have to fear laughter, incredulity or outright scorn. Yet, I did so at a dinner table recently, and the reaction was prompt. Do you have many who agree with you? The question immediately sparked an inner blush of years of adversity and resistance passed in review. But my panic was brief. I asked her if she had heard a saying by Tony Blair. If a system does not work, don't work hard to improve it. Perhaps a different system is needed. The need for a different system was just what Suttner and Nobel saw. And then I asked her how safe she actually felt. Do armaments work? How sensible is the idea of creating security by filling up the world with annihilation technology? Do nuclear weapons guarantee against new wars or global heating? Just think how our so-called security policy can end. My dinner companion had obviously forgotten the massive anti-nuclear protest only a few decades back. She knew nothing of the many today who spend all their time trying to save the world from the final disaster. This is the civil society that I just pointed to at the start as the groups in today's world who most closely meet the idea of Nobel's will. And she listened, and very soon her head shaking turned into pensive nods. The national consensus on security by military defense might not be so massive after all. In all nations, we are disciplined into admiring the military and honor our forces, in the least not question the basic thinking. Thus, it was very encouraging to see what only a few minutes of explaining at the party table could achieve. I wish to conclude that Suttner's ideas are more relevant than ever, more urgently needed than in 1889. I hope these ideas are growing younger by the day. It only takes a few words around the lunch table at work or at the party table for our military delusion to burst. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We heard a former member of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. We heard now some criticism on the Nobel Peace Prize. The question was asked in general, if an organization doesn't work, don't change it, but does it need another system? And now we are going to hear a recipient of the alternative Nobel Peace Prize. So, did this prize change your way of working, change your work? Mr. Ware, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And you might notice from my accent that I'm not from here originally. I'm from New Zealand. And you may wonder why I've come to live in Prague, because New Zealand is number 1 on the global peace... number 2 on the Global Peace Index of, like, second most peaceful country in the world, and I've left it to come over here. Well, there's a few things which inspired me to come to Prague, and one was Bertha von Suttner. I was so inspired learning about her story and her inspiration and the history of her. Another one was another person who got the Nobel Peace Prize, and it was the speech that he gave here that was quite instrumental, and that was President Obama. He gave his first foreign policy overseas speech up next to the castle here, the 20th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, where he highlighted the move to support human rights, democracy, human values in international politics, and how important it was that civil society and small countries like the Czech Republic could play in that move. And to me, that was an incredibly inspiring speech, an inspiring example of what civil society and small countries can do. But also, it's when he put forward the commitment of the United States to achieve a nuclear weapons-free world. Now, neither of those have panned out totally as we would have hoped, and I'll come back to the latter one later. But that was a huge inspiration for me, seeing this role. Another one was Skoda. My first car when I was at university was a Skoda. It was a pretty run-down thing there, but it got me around. I loved the car, and now I'm in the country of Skoda. But actually the main reason was romance, and I can tell you that story over dinner if you want. But I'm really pleased and honoured to be on a panel today with Bishop Stålsett, who is someone who's inspired me also with his leadership in interfaith work and the Religions for Peace, which I had also admired for years, seeing the way that the Religions for Peace was bringing different faith-based communities together, looking for or seeking the commonalities between religions, respecting the differences, and then looking at how the religions should be used to resolve conflicts, not to stimulate conflicts. To me it was wonderful, and I was then very honoured to be invited to be involved in Religions for Peace as an advisor and help work on the disarmament program. So we've worked together on the nuclear disarmament program, and to me that's a really important contribution. The majority of the peoples in the world do belong to one faith or another. So faith-based thinking is very influential. So whether you are a member of a faith-based community or not, one cannot ignore the importance that it can play in these issues. So it's been wonderful to be working with Religions for Peace in that. I also want to commend Prague Vision Institute and the Fredrik Stiftung for bringing an alternative voice on the Nobel Peace Prize here. I think that we need to listen to voices that we may not agree to, or bring different voices together in a context of respect and listening, even if we have that difference. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get out of the quagmires and the divisions that are being created, whether that's in Europe or around the world. And I take one example, Bertha von Suttner herself. She had this friendship with Alfred Nobel, who was not a peace person. He was an industrialist. He was a producer of dynamite. The dynamite explosives was being used in the war.